The moment Harrison Keller saw the woman stride into the Tanapa saloon in the summer of 1884, he knew she was trouble of the kind that didn't need a gun to be dangerous. She wore men's riding clothes covered in trail dust, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes swept the room with the kind of wariness that came from expecting the worst from everyone. Harrison turned back to his whiskey, reminding himself of the vow he'd made 5 years ago when his fiancée had run off with a silver prospector 2 weeks before their wedding. Never again would he let a woman close enough to wreck him. The bartender, old Tom, leaned across the bar. "That's Faith Vance. Came in on the afternoon stage from Carson City. Word is she bought the old Hendricks place out past Rattlesnake Ridge." Harrison's eyebrows rose. The Hendricks place had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since drought and bad luck had driven the family back east. It was a decent spread, maybe 2,000 acres of high desert grazing land, but it needed work and money. She bought it, by herself, apparently so, paid cash according to the land office clerk. Tom wiped down the bar with a rag that had seen better days. "She's asking around about hiring hands, but nobody wants to work for a woman rancher. You know how folks are." Harrison did know. Nevada Territory might be heading toward statehood, but attitudes about women running cattle operations hadn't changed much since the war. He studied the woman from the corner of his eye as she spoke with the bartender. She had a strong profile, straight nose, determined chin. Pretty in a no-nonsense way that suggested she wouldn't appreciate being told so. When Tom pointed in his direction, Harrison quickly looked away, but it was too late. Her boots clicked on the wooden floor as she approached. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably mid-20s to his 32 years. Her eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage after a rainstorm. "Harrison Keller." Her voice was low and direct, no simpering or batting of eyelashes. "That's right. Tom says you're the best rancher in the valley. Says you've got 1,000 head and you built it from nothing in 10 years. She paused, studying him the way he might study a horse he was considering buying. "I need advice." "Advice is free. What do you need to know?" She pulled out the chair across from him without waiting for an invitation and sat down. "I need to know how to make the Hendricks place profitable again. I need to know where to buy cattle, how many hands I'll need, and whether the water rights are worth fighting for." Harrison finished his whiskey. "That's more than advice. That's a consultation that would take hours. I'll pay." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small leather purse. "Name your price." "I don't want your money." He stood up, intending to leave. Women like her, all independence and fire, were exactly the kind he'd learned to avoid. "You want my advice? Sell that place to someone who knows what they're doing and go back to wherever you came from. Ranching in Nevada isn't for amateurs, and it sure isn't for lone women." Her face hardened. "I didn't ask for your opinion on whether I should be here. I asked for practical information. If you're too much of a coward to help a woman, just say so." The accusation stung more than it should have. Harrison sat back down slowly. "Coward, you heard me. You're afraid that helping me might somehow diminish you. That's cowardice dressed up as tradition." She leaned forward, and he caught a faint scent of sage and leather. "I came to Nevada because I inherited money from an aunt, and I wanted to build something of my own. Back in Ohio, I'd have had to marry to have any hope of controlling property or making my own decisions. My father made it clear he expected me to wed his business partner, a man twice my age who smelled like pickled onions and thought women were decorative furniture." Despite himself, Harrison felt a flicker of curiosity. "So you ran away." "I chose freedom. There's a difference." She met his eyes steadily. "I will never marry Mr. Keller. I've seen what marriage does to women." They disappear into their husband's shadows, lose their names, their property, their very selves. I'd rather die alone on my own land than live as someone's legal possession. The conviction in her voice struck something in him, a recognition of kindred determination. He'd sworn off marriage too, though for different reasons. "All right, Miss Vance, I'll help you, not for money but because I respect plain speaking." Her shoulders relaxed fractionally. "Thank you." Over the next hour, Harrison laid out the realities of desert ranching. Water was everything in Nevada. The Hendricks place had 2 decent wells and access to a seasonal creek, but the water rights were contested by the larger ranches in the valley, including his own. She'd need at least 3 experienced hands to start, maybe 5 if she wanted to run more than a few hundred head. Cattle could be purchased from a dealer in Reno or from established ranchers looking to thin their herds before winter. The costs would be significant, and the work would be brutal. "You'll be up before dawn every day," he told her. "You'll deal with predators, drought, disease, market fluctuations, and neighbors who'll try to take advantage of you because you're a woman. You'll spend weeks in the saddle in 100-degree heat or below zero cold. Your hands will crack and bleed. You'll lose cattle to stupidity and bad luck, and after all that, you might still fail." Faith Vance listened to every word without flinching. When he finished, she nodded. "That sounds better than Ohio." Despite his better judgment, Harrison laughed. It was the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. "You might be crazy enough to make it work." "I am." She stood and extended her hand. Her grip was firm when he shook it. "I'd like to hire you as a consultant. Come out to my place once a week, tell me what I'm doing wrong, help me avoid the worst mistakes. I'll pay you $50 a month." "That's too much." "It's what you're worth. Take it or leave it." Harrison knew he should leave it. Getting involved with Faith Vance, even in a business capacity, was asking for complications. But something about her stubborn courage appealed to him. "Once a week," he agreed. "And you do exactly what I tell you, no arguments. I'll do what you tell me if it makes sense. If it doesn't, I'll argue." She smiled for the first time, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "See you Monday morning, Mr. Keller." She walked out of the saloon with the same purposeful stride she'd entered with, leaving Harrison staring after her and wondering what he'd just agreed to. That night, lying in his bed in the ranch house he'd built with his own hands, Harrison couldn't stop thinking about Faith Vance. There was something both admirable and deeply foolish about her determination to succeed in a world that would fight her every step of the way. He'd meant what he said about never marrying. After Rebecca had left him at the altar, he'd buried his hurt under hard work and harder resolve. Love was a weakness he couldn't afford. But consulting for Faith wasn't about romance. It was just business, helping a neighbor get established. Nothing more. He repeated that to himself several times before finally falling asleep. Monday morning arrived with the pale pink light of desert dawn. Harrison rode out to the old Hendricks place, curious to see what condition it was in. The house was a simple adobe structure that needed repairs but had good bones. The barn was worse off, with a partially collapsed roof and broken corral fencing. The land itself rolled away in shades of tan and sage green, dotted with juniper and the occasional Joshua tree. It was harsh country, beautiful in its severity. Faith was already up, trying to hammer a fence post into the rocky ground. She'd abandoned the proper jacket she'd worn in the saloon in favor of a simple work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Sweat dampened her hairline, and her face was flushed with effort. "You're using the wrong technique," Harrison called out as he dismounted. "You'll exhaust yourself before you get it halfway in." She looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Show me the right way, then." He took the post-hole digger from where it leaned against the fence and demonstrated how to work with the rocky soil instead of fighting against it. Faith watched closely, then took the tool back and tried again. Her movements were awkward at first, but she learned quickly. That became the pattern of their morning. Harrison would show her something, she'd try it, make mistakes, ask sharp questions, and try again until she got it right. "You're a quick study," he admitted around noon when they stopped to eat the lunch she'd prepared. It was simple fare, bread and cheese and apples, but it was thoughtfully packed. "I have to be. I can't afford to waste time or money on stupid mistakes." She bit into an apple, chewing thoughtfully. "Tell me about water rights. You said they were contested." Harrison explained the complex situation. Nevada water law was still being worked out, but generally speaking, whoever could prove prior beneficial use had the strongest claim. The problem was that the seasonal creek running through her property also ran through 3 other properties, including his. During dry years, there wasn't enough water for everyone. "So we're going to be in conflict," Faith said. "Probably. Unless we work out some kind of agreement." What kind of agreement? Harrison hadn't actually thought that far ahead, but the question focused his mind. An easement, maybe, or a sharing arrangement based on headcount. It would require lawyers and contracts. Or it would require trust, Faith said quietly. "If we both act in good faith, we could manage the water together instead of fighting over it. Trust is a scarce commodity in cattle country. Then maybe it's time to change that." She looked at him directly, and Harrison felt that uncomfortable stirring again, the sense that Faith Vance was going to turn his carefully ordered life upside down whether he wanted it or not. The weeks passed in a blur of hard work. True to her word, Faith paid Harrison his consulting fee at the end of the first month, though he'd half expected her to run out of money or enthusiasm by then. Instead, she seemed to grow more determined. She hired 3 hands, Mexican cowboys who were willing to work for a woman, because they needed jobs more than they needed to maintain their pride. Harrison helped her select 60 head of cattle, a small starter herd that she could manage with her limited resources. "Don't name them," he warned as she watched the cattle settle into their new home. "It makes it harder when you have to sell them or when they die." "I won't name them," she promised, but he caught her murmuring to a particularly friendly heifer a few days later. Autumn came to the Nevada desert, bringing cooler temperatures and the constant worry about getting hay put up for winter. Faith worked alongside her hands from dawn until well past dark, learning to rope and ride and doctor sick cattle. Harrison found himself riding over to her place more than once a week, ostensibly to check on her progress, but really because he'd started to enjoy her company. She never complained, never asked for special consideration, never played the helpless woman. When she didn't know something, she asked. When she made a mistake, she acknowledged it and moved on. And slowly, despite every wall he'd built around his heart, Harrison found himself looking forward to seeing her. It was dangerous. He knew it was dangerous. One evening in late October, after they'd finished repairing a section of fence that had been knocked down by a spooked steer, Faith invited him to stay for dinner. He should have said no. Instead, he found himself sitting at her simple wooden table while she cooked beans and cornbread on her cast iron stove. "You're getting good at this," he said, watching her move confidently around the kitchen. "I'm adequate. There's a difference." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought them to the table. "Harrison, can I ask you something personal?" He tensed. "I suppose. Why did you really agree to help me? And don't say it's because you respect plain speaking. I think there's more to it than that." Harrison stared into his coffee, watching the steam rise. He could lie. He probably should lie. Instead, he found himself telling her the truth. 5 years ago, I was engaged to be married. Woman named Rebecca. 2 weeks before the wedding, she ran off with a prospector who'd struck silver. Left me a note saying she'd married me for my ranch, but real silver was better than scratching in the dirt for a living. Faith was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. Don't be. She did me a favor, showed me that love is just another form of greed dressed up in pretty words. He met her eyes. I swore I'd never marry after that, never let a woman close enough to wreck me again. And I won't. Good, Faith said firmly. Because I meant what I said too. I'll never marry, never give up my freedom, my property, myself to any man, no matter how kind or handsome he might be. The word handsome hung in the air between them. Harrison felt heat creep up his neck. I wasn't suggesting, I know you weren't. I'm just making sure we understand each other. But her cheeks had colored too, and she looked away quickly. We're both committed to our independence. So we can be friends without any complications. Friends, Harrison repeated. It seemed inadequate for what he was starting to feel, but it was safer than the alternative. All right. Friends. They shook hands across the table, sealing the agreement. Her hand was calloused now from weeks of ranch work, and Harrison held it perhaps a moment longer than necessary before letting go. Winter arrived with shocking speed, as it always did in Nevada. The temperature dropped, and the winds picked up, bringing occasional snow that never quite stuck but made everything harder. Harrison found himself worrying about Faith more than he wanted to admit. Was she keeping warm enough? Did she have sufficient supplies laid in? Were her cattle finding enough forage? He rode over on a bitter cold morning in December to find her in the barn, trying to help one of her cows through a difficult calving. She was covered in blood and birthing fluid, her face tight with concentration and worry. How long has she been laboring? Harrison asked, dismounting quickly. Since before dawn. The calf is breech, I can feel it, but I can't turn it. There was fear in her voice the first time he'd heard her sound uncertain. Harrison rolled up his sleeves. Move over. Let me try. Together they worked to turn the calf. It was hard, messy, exhausting work. The cow bellowed in pain, and Faith murmured soothing words to her, stroking her flank. Finally, Harrison felt the calf shift. 10 minutes later, a spindly-legged bull calf slid into the world, alive and protesting. Faith sagged with relief, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. I thought I was going to lose them both. You did good, Harrison told her. You kept her calm and you knew enough to ask for help. That's half the battle. She looked up at him, and something in her expression made his heart constrict. Gratitude, yes, but also something warmer. Something that echoed the feeling growing in his own chest despite his best efforts to suppress it. Harrison, she said softly, I'm glad you came. So am I. They stayed in the barn until the calf nursed for the first time, making sure everything was all right. By then, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Harrison knew he should head home, but he found himself accepting Faith's invitation to dinner again. This time, the conversation ranged beyond cattle and water rights. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, the things that had shaped them. Harrison learned that Faith's mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to run her father's household while he focused on his manufacturing business. She'd learned early that competence and independence were survival skills. My father loved me in his way, she said, but he never saw me as a person. I was just another asset to be managed, another piece in his business dealings. When he arranged my marriage to his partner, he genuinely couldn't understand why I objected. He thought he was providing for my future. You never considered going through with it? For about 5 minutes. Then I imagined spending the rest of my life as Milton Ferris's wife, hosting his dinner parties and bearing his children and pretending I didn't have a mind of my own. I'd have withered away into nothing. She shook her head. So I took my inheritance and ran. My father hasn't spoken to me since. He says I've disgraced the family. His loss, Harrison said firmly. Faith smiled, but there was sadness in it. What about you? Any family? Parents died of fever when I was 16. No siblings. I worked as a ranch hand for years, saved every penny, and finally scraped together enough to buy my first 100 acres. Built everything from there. He paused. Rebecca was the first time I'd let myself want something besides the ranch. Turned out the ranch was more reliable. At least it can't break your heart. Exactly. But even as he said it, Harrison knew he was lying to himself. His heart was already involved, already at risk. Because he looked forward to seeing Faith more than he should. Because her laugh made something tight in his chest loosen. Because when he lay in bed at night, he imagined what it would be like to wake up beside her every morning. He was falling in love with her, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Christmas came, bringing a rare, heavy snow that blanketed the valley. Harrison spent the holiday alone as he had for the past 5 years, but this year the solitude felt oppressive instead of peaceful. He wondered what Faith was doing, whether she was lonely, whether she ever thought about him the way he thought about her. On the day after Christmas, he loaded up his wagon with supplies and rode over to her place. He told himself it was a neighborly gesture, making sure she had what she needed after the storm. But when Faith opened her door and her face lit up at the sight of him, he knew he'd come for purely selfish reasons. He wanted to see her, needed to see her. "Harrison, come in, you must be frozen." She pulled him inside where a fire crackled in the hearth. "I wasn't expecting anyone. The snow has everything shut down. I brought supplies, thought you might be running low." He gestured to the wagon outside. "That's very kind, but I'm well stocked." She studied him, her perceptive eyes seeing too much. "You didn't really come here to deliver supplies, did you?" Harrison could have lied, should have lied. Instead, he found himself saying, "I wanted to make sure you were all right, and I wanted to see you." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they'd both been trying not to say for months. Faith wrapped her arms around herself, looking vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. "I'm glad you came," she said finally. "I've been thinking about you too, more than I should." "Faith, don't," she held up a hand. "Don't say whatever you're about to say. We both know where this is heading, and we both know it can't happen. You swore you'd never marry. I swore the same. We have perfectly good reasons." "I know." Harrison took a step toward her anyway. "But what if we're both wrong? What if being alone isn't actually protecting us? What if it's just another kind of prison? You don't mean that. You're just lonely because it's Christmas." "I mean it." Another step, until he was close enough to see the silver flecks in her gray-green eyes. "I've been fighting this for months, telling myself I was just being a good neighbor, just helping out a friend. But that's not what this is. I think about you all the time. I look for excuses to see you. When something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. And when something bad happens, I want you beside me to face it." Faith's breathing had quickened. "Harrison, I'm scared. So am I." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. "I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. But Faith, you're already that close. You're already in my heart. Trying to keep you out now is like trying to hold back the sunrise. I can't be someone's wife. I can't lose everything I've built, everything I am. I'm not asking you to lose anything. I'm asking you to gain something, a partner. Someone who sees you exactly as you are and loves you for it. Someone who'd rather die than clip your wings." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What if we wreck each other? What if this is just another mistake? What if it's not?" Harrison whispered. "What if this is the one thing we both got right?" Then he kissed her, soft and careful, giving her every opportunity to say no. For a heartbeat, she was still. Then she kissed him back, her arms coming up around his neck, and it was like coming home to a place he'd never known existed. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Faith pressed her forehead to his. "This is crazy, probably. We said we'd never marry, I remember." "So what do we do now?" Harrison pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "We figure it out together. Maybe marriage doesn't have to be what we thought it was. Maybe we can make it something different, something better." "You're suggesting we rewrite the rules." "I'm suggesting we write our own rules. Keep your ranch. Keep your name if you want it. Keep your independence." "I don't want to own you, Faith. I just want to love you." She laughed through her tears. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. It's terrifying, but I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of trying." Faith kissed him again, longer this time, and Harrison felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble. He'd sworn he'd never marry, never risk his heart again. But Faith Vance had somehow slipped past every defense, and now he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. They spent the rest of the day together, talking about what a future might look like. Harrison suggested they keep their ranches separate but work them together as partners. Faith worried about the legal complications of marriage, how she'd lose her property rights under Nevada law. He promised to talk to a lawyer to find a way to protect her interests. "This is all backwards," Faith said as the winter sun set and painted the snow gold. "Most people fall in love and then worry about the practical details. We're not most people. No, we're not." She laced her fingers through his. "Harrison, I need you to understand something. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to marry you because I love you and I'm tired of being afraid. But I need you to know that I'll never be a conventional wife. I won't stop ranching. I won't stay home while you handle business. I won't pretend to be less than I am to make you look good to other men. I wouldn't want you to be anything other than exactly who you are. That's who I fell in love with." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Faith Vance, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you?" "Yes." The word came out strong and clear with no hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and Harrison felt something that had been broken in him for 5 years finally start to heal. Love wasn't weakness after all. It was the greatest courage he'd ever known. The news of their engagement spread through Tonopah like wildfire. Reactions were mixed. Some folks were happy for them, saying it was about time Harrison moved on from Rebecca's betrayal. Others were scandalized that Faith would still keep her own ranch after marriage, calling it unnatural for a woman to have such independence. Harrison dealt with the naysayers by ignoring them. Faith dealt with them by staring them down until they backed off. They were married on a cold February morning in 1885 by the circuit judge, with Tom the bartender and Faith's 3 ranch hands as witnesses. Faith wore a simple blue dress instead of white, and Harrison wore his best suit. The ceremony was quick and unsentimental, just vows and signatures. But when the judge pronounced them husband and wife and Harrison kissed his bride, he felt something shift in his chest. A rightness. A sense of finally being complete. They held the reception at the saloon, with half the town turning out to wish them well, or to see the spectacle of the 2 most stubborn, independent people in Tonopah actually getting married. Harrison caught Faith's hand under the table and squeezed it, and she squeezed back, her eyes shining. "Having second thoughts," she murmured. "Not a single one, I'm terrified, but I've never been happier." The legal arrangements had taken weeks to work out. Harrison had hired a lawyer from Carson City who specialized in property law. Together, they'd crafted an agreement that protected Faith's ranch and gave her control over her own finances even after marriage. It wasn't perfect, and it required both of them to sign multiple documents, but it was the best protection they could arrange under Nevada's laws. "You're setting a dangerous precedent," the lawyer had warned. "Other women might get ideas." "Good," Faith had said firmly. "Maybe it's time for some new ideas." Their wedding night was spent at Harrison's ranch house, which was larger and more comfortable than Faith's place. Harrison carried her over the threshold, a concession to tradition that made them both laugh. Then he set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "We can take this as slow as you need," he said. "There's no rush." Faith smiled, soft and loving. "I'm not afraid, Harrison. Not of this. Not with you." She reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite the weight of the moment. Harrison helped her with the buttons on her dress, patient and careful. When they finally came together, skin to skin and heart to heart, it felt like everything Harrison had been missing without knowing it. Faith was fierce and tender, vulnerable and strong. She gave herself to him completely while somehow remaining entirely herself, and Harrison fell even more deeply in love with her in that intimacy. Afterwards, lying tangled in the sheets with Faith's head on his chest and her dark blonde hair spread across his skin, Harrison felt a peace he'd never experienced before. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging, but for the first time in his life he wasn't facing it alone. "I love you," he said into the darkness. Faith tilted her head up to look at him, her eyes luminous. "I love you too. I never thought I'd say those words to anyone, but here we are." "Here we are," Harrison echoed and kissed the top of her head. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. They decided to split their time between the two ranches, spending 3 days at Harrison's place and 3 days at Faith's, with Sundays for rest and church if they felt inclined. The arrangement was unconventional, but it worked for them. They combined their herds for better efficiency and shared the labor. Faith's hands were skeptical at first about taking orders from a woman, even if she was the owner, but Harrison made it clear that Faith's word was equal to his. Slowly, the men came to respect her judgment. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and the constant work of calving season. They lost some calves to late cold snaps and predators, but they saved more than they lost. Harrison watched Faith work alongside the men, pulling calves and doctoring sick cows and riding fence line, and his respect for her grew daily. She never shirked the hard jobs or expected special treatment because she was a woman. One evening in late April, after an exhausting day of branding, they sat on the porch of Faith's ranch house and watched the sun set over the desert. Faith leaned against Harrison's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Marrying me instead of staying safely single? Never, do you? Sometimes I'm amazed that I did it, that I trusted someone enough to take that risk." She turned to look at him. "But no, I don't regret it. Even on the hard days, even when we argue about the best way to handle something, I don't regret it. You're my partner, Harrison, my equal. That's what I always needed, even when I didn't know it." "We're going to make mistakes," Harrison said. "We're going to fight and mess up and disappoint each other sometimes, but we'll work through it together." "Together," Faith agreed. "I like the sound of that." As spring turned to summer, they fell into an easy rhythm. They worked hard during the day and fell into bed exhausted at night, but even exhaustion couldn't dim their desire for each other. Harrison had never experienced this kind of sustained intimacy, where passion mixed with genuine friendship and partnership. He loved talking with Faith as much as he loved making love to her. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh, and somehow made the endless hard work of ranching feel purposeful instead of merely survivable. In July, Faith missed her monthly courses. She didn't say anything at first, waiting to be sure, but Harrison noticed the way she sometimes pressed a hand to her stomach with a wondering expression. When she finally told him, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her voice was shaky. "I'm pregnant. I'm almost certain." Harrison's first reaction was pure joy. His second was fear. Childbirth was dangerous, especially in the remote Nevada desert where doctors were scarce and complications could be fatal. "How do you feel about it?" Terrified, excited, overwhelmed, Faith looked up at him. "I always told myself I'd never have children. It seemed like just another way to trap a woman. But now, with you, I want this. I want our baby. Is that crazy?" "No." Harrison knelt beside her chair and took her hands. "It's not crazy. We'll face this together just like everything else. I'm going to keep working as long as I can. I won't be one of those women who becomes fragile and useless because she's pregnant. I know. But you'll also accept help when you need it and you won't take stupid risks. Deal?" Faith smiled through tears. "Deal." They told no one at first, keeping the secret to themselves while Faith's body changed. She was sick in the mornings for weeks, and Harrison held her hair back and brought her water and crackers. By August, her pregnancy was obvious, and the gossip in Tonopah reached new heights. Some people clucked approvingly, saying it was good to see Faith settling into proper womanhood. Others worried that she was still working too hard, that she'd lose the baby or damage herself. Faith ignored them all with her characteristic stubbornness. She modified her work as her belly grew, doing less of the heavy lifting but still riding fence lines and managing the business side of the operation. Harrison watched her like a hawk, ready to intervene if she pushed too hard, but most of the time she judged her own limits accurately. In September, they hired a midwife from Carson City, an experienced woman named Mrs. Donnelly who agreed to come stay with them a month before Faith's due date. The older woman took one look at Faith and nodded approvingly. "You're strong and healthy. Barring complications, you should do fine. But I want you to stop riding immediately. You're too far along to risk a fall." Faith grumbled but agreed. The last months of pregnancy were the hardest for her, not because of physical discomfort but because of the enforced inactivity. She wasn't built for sitting still. Harrison tried to keep her occupied with ledgers and planning, but he could see the restlessness eating at her. "I hate this," she said one evening in late October, shifting uncomfortably on the couch. "I hate feeling like a useless lump. You're growing our child. That's the opposite of useless." "I know, I do know that, but I feel like I'm losing myself, like I'm becoming just a vessel for someone else." Harrison sat beside her and pulled her against his chest. "You're not losing yourself. You're expanding what yourself means. You're still Faith, stubborn and brilliant and strong. But now you're also going to be a mother. That doesn't diminish you, it adds to you." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You always know what to say." "That's because I've been taking lessons from the smartest woman I know." Their son was born on a cold November morning in 1885, after 14 hours of labor that left Harrison feeling helpless and terrified. He stayed with Faith the whole time, holding her hand and wiping sweat from her face and murmuring encouragement, even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, Harrison felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. "You have a son," Mrs. Donnelly announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. "A big, healthy boy." Faith reached for the baby with shaking arms, and Harrison helped support their weight while she cradled their son against her chest. Tears streamed down her face. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." "He's perfect," Harrison whispered, stroking one tiny fist with his finger. "You're perfect. Thank you, Faith. Thank you for this gift." They named him Henry Harrison Keller after Harrison's father. The baby had a shock of dark hair and gray-green eyes like his mother. Harrison fell completely in love within seconds of holding him, marveling at how something so small and fragile could inspire such fierce protective feelings. Faith recovered quickly from the birth, though Mrs. Donnelly insisted she rest for at least 2 weeks before doing any serious work. Faith compromised by handling paperwork and plans from bed, while Harrison and the ranch hands managed the daily operations. But by the 3rd week, she was up and moving, baby Henry strapped to her chest in a carrier as she moved around the house. "You can't rush recovery," Harrison warned, worried she'd hurt herself. "I'm not rushing. I'm healing. There's a difference." But she winced when she moved too quickly, and Harrison insisted she slow down. They adjusted to parenthood in fits and starts. Henry was a demanding baby, waking every few hours to nurse and filling his days with the usual baby needs. Faith nursed him and changed him, and sang to him in the quiet hours of the night. Harrison walked the floor with his son when Faith was too exhausted, telling the baby stories about the ranch and the desert and the big future waiting for him. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Faith said one night, watching Harrison rock Henry to sleep. "I thought I understood love after falling for you, but this is different. It's so consuming." "It is," Harrison agreed, "but it doesn't diminish what we have. It's just more love. We're not dividing it up. We're multiplying it." Winter settled in hard that year, with snow and bitter cold that made ranch work miserable. But inside their home, with the fire crackling and baby Henry gurgling in his cradle, Harrison had never felt more content. He'd been wrong to think love made you weak. Love made you strong. It gave you something worth fighting for, worth building for, worth becoming your best self for. By spring of 1886, Faith was fully back to work, though they'd hired additional help so she could balance mothering with ranching. Henry was a happy baby who seemed content to be carried around on horseback or to nap in a basket in the shade while his parents worked. Harrison worried constantly about keeping him safe, but Faith pointed out that ranch children had been growing up this way for generations. "We can't wrap him in cotton wool," she said. "He'll learn about cattle and horses and hard work. He'll learn about the land, and he'll learn that his mother is as capable as his father." Harrison kissed her temple. "He's lucky to have you as a mother. We're lucky to have each other." The years rolled by in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Their ranches prospered, aided by good rainfall and careful management. Harrison and Faith became respected figures in Tonopah, known for their fairness and success. The water rights disputes resolved themselves through the trust-based sharing agreement Faith had suggested, and neighboring ranchers grudgingly admitted that maybe a woman could run a cattle operation after all. Henry grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's determination and his father's steady temperament. He took his first steps chasing after a barn cat and spoke his first word, "cow," while pointing at the herd. Faith and Harrison watched him grow with pride and wonder, marveling at how this small person was such a perfect blend of both of them. In the summer of 1888, Faith discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, only joy and anticipation. Their daughter was born in March of 1889, a tiny thing with Harrison's dark hair and Faith's stubborn chin. They named her Ellen, after Faith's mother, and Henry was instantly fascinated by his baby sister. "Gentle," Faith reminded him constantly as he tried to poke and pet the baby. "She's very small right now. She'll get bigger," Henry announced confidently, "like the calves." Harrison laughed and ruffled his son's hair. "That's right, buddy, she'll get bigger." Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The house that had once seemed spacious now felt full, filled with toys and laughter, and the constant activity of young children. Faith somehow managed to balance motherhood with ranch management, though Harrison made sure she had plenty of help. They hired a young woman from town to help with the house and children a few days a week, giving Faith time to focus on the business side of things. "I'm not giving up my work," she told Harrison fiercely, when he suggested she might want to slow down. "Being a mother doesn't mean I stop being myself. I know, I'm not suggesting you give up anything, I'm just trying to make sure you don't exhaust yourself doing everything." She softened. "I know, and I appreciate it, but Harrison, I need you to understand. This life we've built, where I can be a wife and a mother and a rancher all at once, it's everything I dreamed of even when I didn't think it was possible. I'm not going to give up any piece of it." "You shouldn't have to," Harrison said firmly, "and I'll make sure you never do." The children grew. Henry started helping with small ranch chores, feeding chickens and gathering eggs and learning to groom the gentler horses. Ellen followed her brother everywhere, determined to do whatever he did despite being 3 years younger. Faith taught them both to read and write, setting up a small schoolroom in the house since the nearest school was 10 miles away in Tanapa. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Harrison and Faith would sit together on the porch and talk about their days, their plans, their dreams for the future. Sometimes they talked about serious things like cattle prices and water management. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge over the desert. "You remember when we first met?" Faith asked one summer evening in 1891. "You told me to sell my ranch and go back to Ohio." Harrison groaned. "I was an idiot. You were scared. So was I." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We were both so determined to protect ourselves that we almost missed this, almost missed us. Thank God we didn't." Harrison kissed the top of her head. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Faith Vance Keller. You and our children and this life we built together. I still use Vance sometimes, you know, for business. I know, and I love that you do. You never stopped being yourself, because you never asked me to." She turned to face him, her eyes serious. "That's what makes us work, Harrison. We chose each other. We keep choosing each other every day, not because of law or social obligation, but because we want to." "I'll always choose you," Harrison promised, "until the day I die and beyond." In 1893, their youngest child was born, another son they named James. By then, Henry was 7 and Ellen was 4, and both were excited about the new baby. The house felt even fuller, but it was a good fullness, the kind that came from love and family and life lived fully. Faith was 33 now and Harrison was 40. They'd been married for 8 years, and Harrison sometimes looked at his life with wonder, marveling at how different it was from what he'd planned. He'd thought he'd spend his life alone, focused on building his ranch and nothing more. Instead, he had a wife who was his true partner, 3 beautiful children, and a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. The children grew up immersed in ranch life. Henry showed a natural aptitude for working with cattle and announced at age 10 that he wanted to be a rancher just like his parents. Ellen was more interested in the business side, poring over ledgers with her mother and asking sharp questions about profit margins and market trends. Little James was still too young to show his inclinations, but he seemed fearless around the animals and had inherited his mother's stubbornness in full measure. "We're raising quite a crew," Harrison observed one evening, watching the children play in the yard. "We are," Faith agreed. "I hope they understand how rare this is, how lucky they are to have parents who actually like each other. We'll make sure they do." As the children grew older, they needed more education than Faith and Harrison could provide at home. In 1896, they made the difficult decision to send Henry and Ellen to the school in Tanapa during the week, with the children coming home on weekends. It was hard on everyone, especially Faith, who missed her children terribly during their absences. but both agreed that education was too important to neglect. "We're giving them choices," Faith said, trying to convince herself as much as Harrison. "Education means they can be whatever they want to be, not just what circumstance forces on them." "You're a good mother," Harrison told her, pulling her into his arms. "The best." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family. There were good years and bad years, boom times and lean times. They lost cattle to disease and drought. They dealt with neighboring ranchers who tried to encroach on their water rights or land. They weathered market crashes and labor disputes, and all the challenges that came with running a large operation in the harsh Nevada desert. But through it all, Harrison and Faith faced everything together. They argued sometimes, both too stubborn to back down easily, but they always worked through it. They'd learned that marriage wasn't about never fighting. It was about fighting fair and always remembering that they were on the same team. In 1899, Nevada moved closer to statehood, and with it came changes in property laws. Harrison made sure their legal protections were updated and strengthened, ensuring that Faith maintained full control over her assets, regardless of how the laws evolved. Some men thought he was crazy for giving his wife so much independence, but Harrison knew it was the foundation of their success. Faith's intelligence and business acumen had helped them prosper. Why would he want to limit that? Their children grew into young adults. Henry, at 17, was tall and strong, already managing significant portions of the ranch operations. Ellen, at 14, had inherited her mother's sharp mind and fierce independence. She talked about going to university back east, studying business or law. James, at 9, was still finding his way but showed signs of becoming the most innovative of the three, always experimenting with new techniques for everything from irrigation to horse training. One evening in the summer of 1901, as Harrison and Faith sat on their porch watching the sunset, Faith took his hand. "We did it," she said softly. "Did what?" "Built a life. A real life, not the half-life of loneliness we thought we were protecting ourselves from." She looked at him, her gray-green eyes still as captivating as they'd been 16 years ago. "We broke first, Harrison, both of us. We broke open and let love in even though we were terrified." Harrison raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Best decision I ever made. Mine too." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Inside the house, they could hear their children talking and laughing. The cattle lowed in the distance. A hawk called overhead, circling in the thermal currents over the cooling desert. Harrison thought about the man he'd been when he first met Faith, so determined to protect himself that he'd nearly missed the love of his life. He thought about how close they'd both come to choosing safety over happiness, independence over connection. They'd both sworn they'd never marry, never risk their hearts. But Harrison had broken first, unable to resist Faith's courage and strength and the way she'd somehow slipped past every defense he'd built. And in breaking, in surrendering to love, he'd found a wholeness he hadn't known was possible. "I love you," he said, as he'd said countless times over the years. "I love you too," Faith replied, as she always did. But the words carried deeper meaning now, weighted with years of partnership and passion, challenges overcome and joys shared. They'd chosen each other against their better judgment, against all their carefully reasoned arguments for staying single. And in doing so, they discovered that love wasn't the trap they'd feared. It was freedom of the deepest kind, the freedom to be fully yourself with another person, to build something greater than what either could create alone. The stars began to emerge, piercing the darkening sky one by one. Harrison squeezed Faith's hand and she squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they'd built together over 16 years of marriage: trust, partnership, enduring love. They'd both sworn they'd never marry. The cowboy had broken first, unable to resist the pull of his heart. And in breaking, he'd found himself remade into something better, stronger, more complete than he'd ever been alone. The desert wind whispered across the range, carrying the scents of sage and juniper and the endless Nevada sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as every day did. But tonight, Harrison Keller sat beside his wife on the porch of their ranch house, surrounded by the life they'd built together, and knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Years later, when Henry took over the main operations of the combined ranches, and Ellen returned from university with radical ideas about agricultural innovation, and James proved to be a natural horse trainer, Harrison and Faith finally slowed down a bit. They didn't retire, both too stubborn and active for that, but they delegated more and spent more time together, just the two of them. By 1910, they were grandparents, with Henry having married a schoolteacher from Tonopah and blessed them with 2 grandchildren. Ellen had shocked everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in Nevada. James had married a Paiute woman he'd met while trading horses, and their mixed heritage children were beautiful and bright. Harrison was 58 now, his dark hair shot through with silver. Faith was 50, her face lined by sun and wind but still beautiful to him. They spent their evenings on the porch, as they always had, watching the sunset and talking about their days. "We're old," Faith observed one evening with amusement. "Speak for yourself. I'm in my prime." She laughed and swatted his arm. "We've had a good life, Harrison, better than I ever imagined when I stepped off that stage in Tonopah 26 years ago. Better than I imagined when I told you to sell your ranch and go home." Harrison pulled her close. "Thank God you ignored me." "I've been ignoring your bad advice for over a quarter-century." "Why stop now?" They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. The grandchildren would arrive tomorrow for a visit, filling the house with noise and joy. Henry would bring reports on the cattle operations. Ellen would regale them with tales of her latest legal victory. James would show them his newest horses, sleek and fast and perfectly trained. But tonight was just for them, for Harrison and Faith, the stubborn rancher and the determined woman who'd both sworn they'd never marry. They'd broken their vows to themselves, and in doing so, found something infinitely more valuable than the safety of solitude. They'd found partnership, passion, family, and a love that had weathered every storm and grown stronger with each passing year. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged in their countless thousands, Harrison kissed his wife's temple and thought about the journey they'd traveled together. From that first meeting in the Tonopah saloon to this quiet evening on their porch, every moment had been worth it. Every challenge, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt or fear had led them here, to this peaceful contentment. The cowboy had broken first, surrendering to love despite his vow never to marry. And in that surrender, he'd won everything that truly mattered. A life lived fully, with purpose and passion. Children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. And most precious of all, the love of a woman who'd been his equal partner in every way, who challenged him and supported him and loved him for exactly who he was. "What are you thinking about?" Faith asked, noticing his contemplative silence. "How lucky I am. How grateful I am that you walked into that saloon all those years ago." "I'm grateful too." She snuggled closer and Harrison wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "For all of it. For you, for our family, for this life we built together." They sat that way as the night deepened, Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their stubborn courage and unexpected love. The desert stretched away in all directions, vast and eternal, but here on this porch, in this moment, Harrison and Faith Keller had everything they needed. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The cattle settled for the night. In the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. But Harrison wasn't lonely anymore, hadn't been lonely since the day Faith Vance had challenged him in a saloon and changed his life forever. He'd broken first, surrendered first, loved first, and he'd won.